Okay, so let's start off with uh, this position is in Orlando, um, and they're looking for someone with 7 to 10 years of experience with Red Hat or Oracle Linux. You see VMware EXI. Um, they want someone they prefer for someone to have a VMware certification, and they got some SAP and they got some Oracle, meaning they got some database stuff supporting UC4 workload. I have no idea. You will have to look that up. Lead large strategic enterprise wide projects. Sound like a lead position on architecture. And then what else? Oh, verbal and written, meaning make sure you know how to document. And we talked about this last week. Lean Sigma ITIL. And oh yeah, and then experience with minimum supervision. In other words, can I leave you alone and you figure it out? All right. So, what questions should you ask? I'm gonna open up the floor to you because this is a really engaging talk that we're doing. But what's the number one question offer here? Would you be asking a recruiter, or what questions would you be asking if you're in the interview? Like if the interviewer come back and ask you a question, I'll start off. The first question is I will ask is you say you need to have knowledge of Red Hat Linux or Oracle Linux. I would be asking what versions of Red Hat are you looking at? Red Hat 4, 5, 6, or 7? Do you have licenses for those servers? What size of the environment do you have? Is it like, is it 10 servers and 30 workstations? Is it 5 servers and 5,000 workstations? What role does Oracle Linux play in this? How big is your virtualization infrastructure, meaning your VMware infrastructure? Um, if you prefer someone to get, um, if you prefer someone to have um, configuration management and automation, is it just from a VMware perspective? Is the infrastructure as code? Tunde said, has how large is your team? What role are you playing on that team? What would be your position in that? Is it 24/7 workshop? Um, and right now, I have to look up UC4, but how to lead strategic enterprise wide, like how visible is this project? Is this project just for the company itself, or is this project visible by other companies? Will other companies be using this project? Will other developers be using this project within the company? Who is the customer? Like who is my customer? Is my customer someone numbers coming in? Is my customer the developers, or is my customer outside of this arena? Who are my customers? Do you have a backup and recovery solution? Do you need one design? What's your disaster recovery? All these questions are things that you want to ask. I mean, and I can go on and on and on. But here's the flip side of that. The flip side of that is those very same questions that I'm asking are the very same questions you need to be able to answer. Have you ever designed a backup and recovery solution? What type of backup and recovery solution do you have in place? If I give you a server, can you design me a backup and recovery solution? Have you ever documented anything before? What's your choice of editor? Um, have you ever used Visio? Um, have you ever used have you ever been given a hard task, and how did you accomplish it? Um, what is your go-to when it's time to build out an infrastructure? What do you use? Do you sit down and write out your questions first and then go get answers, or do you design something and then go get answers? So those are the kind of questions and things that you should be asking and things that you should be looking at. Now the next set of questions, and remember, this could be with a recruiter, because sometimes you'll get a recruiter that's very knowledgeable, and sometimes you get a recruiter that doesn't know anything. Then there's sometimes you get someone who's been at the job for 6 months and they're just doing the first part of the interview, and you may ask these questions and they don't know. So then you have to roll into another situation. Amber says it is expected for someone who is just starting out in the field to know all these things upon going in their first interview. No, but that's why you're here. It's not expected for you to know these things, but this is why you come to the meetup, so that you can know, so that you can educate yourself, and so you can write these questions down and then go back and answer them um, to your best of ability. And on top of that, that's why we have the Slack group, so that you all can ask these questions and get involved, so that you understand like what you should be asking, what you should be researching. So this is why we do this. Um, the other one question that you should be asking is, what kind of methodology are you using? Are you using Scrum? Are you using waterfall? Are you doing agile? What are you doing? What are you using for configuration management? And when I mention configuration management, I'm talking about this. So with configuration management, you can use, most people are using Atlassian products. They just IPO'd last year. I think they IPO'd for $1 billion, I think, if I remember correctly. But here's Atlassian products, and a lot of people are using things like Jira, which is more Jira software. It used to be just Jira. Now they're broken it down into different stuff. And Confluence. And one of the other methods that everyone loves is the Kanban. All right, so let's see if they got a image of this. Awesome. They don't. Let's go here. Any images? No. Who has a good one? Trelio is one. Let's go back over to Trelio, which was bought by Atlassian. Let me see, do that. So here's what it looks like. Kind of throwing up your projects on there, and then setting up your sub projects, and then prioritizing this information. So let me shoot you all this. And then let me go back to Atlassian and shoot you this. So out of the Atlassian products, I could honestly tell you what is going to be a strong suit on your resume would be Jira Software, Confluence, Bitbucket, Trilio, and Bamboo. All those products, or in fact, you can just learn those products alone and get a job with just those products alone. Um, they're always looking for Atlassian admins or Confluence admins, so, or Jira admins. So if we went here and we type in Jira and then hit enter, you'll see stuff about tools such as Jira, Confluence, and Bamboo. Again, like I say, you could just take just this website, and they have a university. You could take just this and go learn this stuff and for training and implement it yourself, because the licenses are fairly cheap for a person who just want to learn, and go from there. So let's look at the learning path. So they got a Jira administrator, a Jira project administrator, agile, Confluence user, so forth and so on. So you could literally come here and start learning on this stuff. Let's see what they have for free training, free tutorials. So they got Learn Jira Basics, Go Agile, Gain Project Insight, JQL, and Get Atlassian. So, I mean, you can spend your time here just learning this stuff and apply it to your environment and to your resume, and then go from there. Well, it's always good to learn technologies over products, but this right here is still, in this case, you're still doing both. You're still learning a technology and you're still learning a product. And when I say that, meaning you're learning how processes and procedures work and what are they using for configuration management in that case. most places are using Jira, Confluence, or all the entire Atlassian suite. So I say that to say you can go learn processes, procedures, but then you still have to learn how to implement that with a particular product. So it's either or. In terms of Git, everyone is using Git. There's GitLab and GitHub. So that's going to always be there. But again, it's a technology. How long did it take you from when you first started learning Linux to become proficient? So I just started every day. I did. I worked on Linux every single day for like maybe anywhere from 3 to 5 hours, and I just started doing it. So being self-taught, sitting in a room, reading a book, trying out commands, figuring things out. I don't think you ever become proficient in it. I think you're always learning. So there's always something new that's coming out, and you're always learning. Um, yeah, project management tools. Isaiah and Thomas, is the configure management. Is it config? Well, there's two things. There is configuration management, and then there's project management. So you can go and say, okay, I'm a project manager, and in this particular one, they're using SharePoint. Or you say I'm a project manager and I'm using Jira and Confluence and so forth. And then configuration management, we're talking more like orchestration and so forth, but you can use Jira and Confluence within your configuration management. So it's twofold. But if you're a project manager, if you're just going down that right route, I would learn Jira and Confluence, anything Agile and Kanban, ITIL. Those are things that I would focus on. I say you have to know all of them. You can know one and not know the other, but if you know a little bit of something, you can speak to it in a inside of a interview. If you know a lot of something, then they can kind of pigeonhole you into a position where you're just doing that. So I'm a journalist. A lot of people like to be specialists. I prefer to like know a little bit about a lot of things. And then if I have to dive into something for a job, I'll dive into something for a job. If I don't have to, then I won't. I may do it because I want to know it, but I generally try to stay a journalist. Some people love to be specialists. I never found in my career where I had to be a specialist, because most of the time I had to know a lot of things. So if my hand had to touch security, I'm touching security. If I had to do configuration management, I'm touching that. If I got to be a project manager because I'm managing my own project, and on top of that, I'm doing configuration management and security, then I'm going to do those things too. So it depends on where you fall in at a company. You may fall in a company where you just only do backups, or you may fall into a company where you do backups and security, and you may fall into a company where you're only doing security from a paperwork perspective, where it's processes, procedures. So that's kind of like what I see. There is a role for learning software development lifecycle practices as a sysadmin. That's usually is I don't even want to say it's a sysadmin role. I want to say something like that's like more like a full stack, or front end, back end. I know at Salesforce, a lot of their engineers were more focused on, depending on the role, were focused on performance. So it was more or less like, hey, we got this application that's running slow. We need to figure out why this application is running slow, and not from a perspective of a system, but from perspective of performance. So that may be doing some software, that may be doing some performance tuning, that may be doing some hardware tuning. But then again, you're talking about a huge company where someone may only do the front end of it, and someone who needs to test out to see if how the server is performing may not even hit the server itself. So it depends. But there are tracks just for that. And that kind of goes into site reliability engineering. If you ever, I think Michael Jenkins brought that up today with that book, SRE, Google book. So yeah, you can read this online. This came up today. Download for free right here. I'll send you this. So when you are looking at sysadmin and site reliability engineer, I actually did a article on this from on Women in Linux on site reliability engineer and sysadmin, and you can go on YouTube and you can look at her name. Uh, it's gonna come back to me. Hold on. SRE versus admins or DevOps engineer. I think that's what it falls under. Oh God, what is her name? Right here, Liz Fong. So Liz is she works over at Google. She is in I think she's in San Francisco or she may be in New York. I think she's in San Francisco. Anyway, Liz is a friend of Women in Linux. She is I did an interview with her on the difference between like a SRE, DevOps, sysadmin. But then they also went back and they've done a clear distinction on what to look for and so forth. If you follow her on Twitter, you can ask her all the questions that you want. She's pretty responsive, and she'll answer your questions as well too. So I beg you, like, if you hit her up, I'm sure she'll ask. It's just like, hey, Tamika from Women in Linux sent me over here to ask you a whole bunch of questions, and she'll be like, oh, cool, great, I'm gonna ask. So I'll roll with that. Any other questions on what we just talked about? No. Okay. All right. So besides asking those questions, I want to. I was thinking about this earlier. I wanted to kind of deviate from, and well, not deviate, differentiate from beginner, intermediate, and advanced. All right. And when I say this, don't take it personal. And when I say this, don't beat your head up about it. This is just from my perspective. Okay? So, from my perspective, if you are a beginner, I'm going to tell you, and it's for anyone, to get you a Linux Academy account. All right? I want you to get a Linux Academy account. I also want you to um go in here and start looking at their Linux classes. And so here they have Red Hat. Let's just click on that. All right, so here you see they have RHCSA or RHCA. And then they also have, let me see if I can pull all of them up. All right, so they have it broken down into beginner. And I'm going to go through these one by one. Should you start out with DevOps Essential? If you're just doing Linux, no. I'm going to tell you to start with VMware. I'm also going to tell you to start with Git. And because of the way they have it laid out, I'll tell you to start with the LPI Essentials. Just to start, right? We're just doing basic Linux. We're not going to add anything else on top of this. And then from there, I would start and I would go into some scripting with Python and Bash. And then I would go into maybe at that point the RECSA. So Python and Bash are your scripting ones that you would want to use. Understanding Vim, and then understanding some basic commands of Linux, and then going to your RECSA. the reason why I say that is because um, after you start doing things in a repeated form or repetitive fashion, you'll just start remembering stuff. Like it'll just become osmosis to you. So things like, I wonder if this machine is up. Let me see if I got a machine that's up. I don't know. Just scroll up here. Probably not. I know what that is. I probably don't have a machine up, but that's okay. We could still get the best of it. Like if I do PWD, lets me know what current directory I'm in. LS, a long listing, clear. If I do ls minus l, it's going to give me a long listing plus permissions, the size of files, and so forth. I'm not sure about what ls gives me. Do a man on ls. These things are basics. And I had to look through my email. I have like a basic some I had some questions. I think I had like 100 questions that I used to go over before every interview in order to understand, in order to get the in order to say, okay, well, I know these commands, I understand these things. You see, if I understand correctly, to properly and effectively support the user base, it is useful to both familiarize with their tool sets, workflows, as well as leveraging the efficiencies of their process and sysadmin responsibilities. Is if I understand correctly, to properly and effectively support the user base. It depends on the user base. What are you defining as a user? Uh, and their tool sets and workflows. That's what I hear you saying is, and I can counter that. I hear you saying, "Hey, I need to understand how the users are using, or how they're using their tool sets and so forth, and workflows in their environment." That's if you are supporting a group of users that are developers. But what if you're supporting a group of users that are just sysadmins and so forth? So that may change. Or you may not be directly supporting the developers themselves. You may be supporting the admins that are supporting the developers. So it depends on it depends on the environment. It it may also be that you're not even supporting any developers at all. You may just be building out the infrastructure in order for the admins to build out their infrastructure. So it could be a number of things. So it don't necessarily have to be the tool sets and the workflows they're using. You may actually be the admin that is pushing the workflow and pushing the tool sets for those people to use. So it depends on where you fall in that category. It could be a number of places that you fall into that category. um but again, it depends on the environment and the questions you ask and what are you going in for. So those are just things to keep in mind. The next thing that I think everyone should learn is an automation tool, and that could be on here. They have Puppet. They should have Ansible on here, and or Chef. What's hot right now is company dependent, but Ansible is the easiest to learn. Puppet and Chef are kind of neck and neck, and as far as as being complex, and then Salt. So those I would pick Puppet and Ansible, and then I think Chef and Salt are kind of like, I know Georgetown University uses Ansible, they use Chef, and they use Salt. So it depends. And then you start getting into, hey, I need to do infrastructure as code and I want to be agnostic, then it's Terraform. So you can pull a lot of different ways when it comes to it. So here they got an introduction to VMware. I tell anyone, just go through that. Um, Not so much the container stuff, but again, system administration guide to bash scripting. Do it, go to that class. Here it is. They got the Ansible one. You can actually literally learn this as a beginner. It says advanced, but you could take it as a beginner and start understanding things really quickly. Um, the hardening prep course, that's if you want to get into security and start hardening stuff. Is a good to know if you're in a clearance background, or even if you're in banking or working at a hedge fund. It's good to know. RHCE, again, it's after some time. I will get into that. PowerShell, for those that are working in a Windows and a Linux environment, good to know. But again, like I say, I will run through these classes and pick things that you think are are not as time consuming as you would think. Like these classes that are like 4 hours, 3 hours, 6 hours. I would do those classes first, and then these classes that are like 38 hours, like this right here, that's going to take some time. You probably had to do 2 hours a night, 3 hours a night. You just think 38 hours is a week. So you could just go ahead and double, triple that. That's how long it's really going to take for you to learn if you never ever seen it. So just keep that in mind. But those are the things that I would learn, like mastering command line, 2 hours and 40 minutes. You could spend a Saturday and go through that, like, and really be done with it in 5 hours. So those are things if you just go through for that. Any other questions? Is this information good for you all? Okay, I guess so. All right. All right. So the next thing I want to do is say, okay, beginner. Like I said before, VMware, like this intro to VMware, VI, some Bash scripting, some Python scripting, understanding basic command lines, what is an RPM, how to make a script, how to install a package, what is a kernel, and I'll pull up these questions here in a minute. So when you start getting into intermediate, you should have already at least gone through the RHCSA class and be starting to begin into the RHCE stuff. Um, Intermediate, you and even beginner, you should be focused on some security stuff like SE Linux, and going from there. Another thing, as you start developing your skill sets, is it's not all about just Linux. So when I say that, you're like, Tamika, what are you talking about? Well, it tells you right here. It's showing you right here: VMware, Jenkins, Puppet modules, OpenStack, Docker, Salt. I mentioned Terraform, Nginx, Elasticsearch. Now we're starting to get into things that are applications or tool sets that you should be using in your environment in order to maintain a cohesive environment. Remember, when we're doing stuff, we want things to be repeatable. We want everything to be automated. We want documentation, and we want everyone to be able to do this again. So, so how do we make this accomplishment? Well, you remember that little stuff we just talked about earlier? Atlassian products, uh, GitLab, GitHub, Jira, Confluence. Um, you could pick a product. I'm just mentioning things, but each environment is different. Because some people use MediaWiki, some people just use Wiki. When you start talking about where do I create this documentation, where do I put this documentation? Some people put the documentation in GitHub and GitLab. Some people put their documentation in Confluence as a wiki or media wiki, or they just put it in SharePoint, or they just write up a document and save it off and throw it up in GitLab or GitHub, or they leave it on their desktop. So it's multiple places and multiple ways to create your documentation. But how do I make my documentation accessible for the whole team to use? How do my findings that I find for errors or things that you just gotchas, and you want everyone to know, where would I store that at? Like, do I store that on this website? what's my centralized repository of information, not like your ISOs or your script that you wrote, but my documentation. So intermediate, you should really be focused on honing in on automation, and even beginner, but really more so intermediate. You should really be focusing on automation. You should really be focusing in on your documentation. What does that look like? Maybe they have a certain standard. And while we're speaking on that, a technical writer is another avenue inside of, let me put this one. A technical writer is another avenue, another job, in case no one ever thought about it. And see, write documentation, identify gaps in the library, propose guides to fill those gaps, work with other writers, subject matter experts, strong understanding of Linux, strong understanding of Git, basic understanding of programming concepts, ability to read code, basic markdown language, 2 years of experience as a technical writer, proofreading, and that is a technical writer. And you would think that you didn't have to know Linux as a technical writer, but you would need to understand what that person is trying to say in this documentation to make sure that someone else who grabs this documentation can understand this documentation. So the Git that I showed you, the documentation, the programming languages. Again, this technical writer write up is really a good intro for a beginner leading into an intermediate. This is really a good one, because it kind of touches on every single thing, but there's not a deep dive. As you move over into your as you move over into your intermediate, then you start picking up like, hey, I really like Go as my programming language versus Python, because I can get this information back from servers, whereas I can't get this information back from servers. I can get this information, but it's a little more work that I have to do. So those are the things that you start looking at. I like Ansible over Salt because Ansible was really easy for me to use because I just use SSH keys, versus Salt. I have some complexity build up first before I can start using it. So this is the time where you start tuning in and becoming a specialist in some things. Like some things are your go-to things. Like, just like when you go to the grocery store, you pick your peanut butter and you're like, I don't want crunchy peanut butter, I want smooth and creamy. Or I prefer jam over jelly. You start fine-tuning your tool set and starting like, okay, these are the things that are my go-to when I'm in this situation. And then when you become a senior Linux administrator, you've probably gone through those things where you picked out your tools that that's your go-to, but you realize that your go-to is a little complex. But if you learn this over here, you can do it in half the time. So you'll start playing with that and put that in your toolbox, and you'll say, well, when I get to the table and I need to do this, I'm gonna pull this tool out. My go-to tool, it's cute, but I'm gonna go over here and use this one. So those are the things that you start learning as you go along. And then after all those years of experience, now it's time to say, okay, I'm gonna look at the 10,000-foot view. And now that's when you start seeing the whole picture. So you think about it like this: when you are the beginner and you're walking into the grocery store, you're like, oh wow, this is a lot, but I'm gonna go over here to the corner and I'm just gonna learn these things. Just a few small things. We just get a few small items. And then as you go to the grocery store more and more, you're like, well, this is not so bad. You're entering the intermediate world, and you're like, well, I'm gonna branch out from, the frozen food section to, I'm gonna go over here and try the organics and a little flavor of this and a little flavor of that. And then when you become advanced, you're like you're walking in. You're like, well, I'm gonna go over here to the frozen food because I like some things over there. It's not as much of a hassle. I'm gonna go over here to the organic section and pull some stuff out, and then I'm gonna go over here to the back and do this. So you start switching up with things that you like. And then as you start becoming not the advance anymore and you become the architect, you're looking at the whole store as a whole. And you're looking at it from a 10,000 foot view of like, okay, well, I like a lot about this particular store, but I don't like how this store is set up. So if I had a store, I would redesign it this way. So now you're thinking about the bigger picture of things. So as you start thinking about being an architect, you're not only concerned about how the design is laid out, you're concerned about the workflow. And then not only are you concerned about the workflow, you're also concerned about, um, is the process repeatable? And then not only is it repeatable, is it secure? Is it not can I take my documentation and hand it to the beginner who just walked in the store, and they can go from beginner all the way to advanced with this documentation that I'm giving them to recreate this infrastructure. And that's how you start thinking about things. Does all this make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that's what. And when you are looking at this and thinking about this, I also want you to uh think about these things as you start doing interviews, as you start asking questions of people in the field. Think about, ask them what their tool set is, ask them what are their go-to's are, ask them what do they like to use, ask them, what were their steps to learning things. And a lot of people tell you it's trial and error. I mean, that's just what it is. You're gonna fail, and you're gonna fail miserably, and then you're gonna get back up on your feet, and you're gonna keep going. So it's a little bit of everything. So when you want to start exploring and branching out, here are the things that outside of Linux I think that you should focus on: Docker, VMware, Elasticsearch for logging, VMware for virtualization, and inside VMware KVM. Why KVM as your hypervisor? Because that is what is used at Google. That is what is used on um, Amazon, and it is native to Linux as well. So those are the things that you would want to focus on. And how do you manage that? We did a meetup on Cockpit. That's a good tool for a beginner to use to understand, how things work, and how can I look at all my machines at one instance. It's on our YouTube, so check it out. The other thing I would look at is most definitely Git, and then Jenkins, and then how to pull everything together so you have an automated workflow. And that's where your Jenkins comes into play, your Git, and so forth. And there is in Linux Academy, there is a class specifically on Jenkins. It's a quick start, but there's another one I think that's like 8 hours long, and they talk about installing and building doing your first Jenkins build and so forth and so on. Michael Jenkins is part of Women in Linux and part of Blacks in Technology. He's a good person to ask. It's one of his specialties is Jenkins itself. Ironically, his last name is Jenkins, and Jenkins, so Jenkins and Jenkins go together. uh so I would ask him as well too to give you a tutorial. In fact, he has on YouTube. He did a meetup. At the summit. He did a class on Jenkins. So I will pull from his GitHub and look at his Jenkins tutorial online as something that you would want to use. Another tool set that you want to get familiar with, like I said, was Kubernetes, but it is OpenShift, and it is here inside of the Linux Academy. So OpenShift is a pay is a I didn't mean to go that. There is a paid version and then there's a free version of OpenShift. Oh, come on. So the paid version OpenShift is from Red Hat. The free version is based on this. So you can go through this class. Let's see, 18 hours. I did it in a weekend. I sat down one weekend and did all this in a weekend. I'll go back and do the exercises, but it's kind of built off of Kubernetes class. But this is a good class for you to um, do some understanding of workflows, understanding Docker, understanding containers. It's all in this class. It's hot right now. People are hiring left and right for this. OpenShift and OpenStack. So containers, OpenShift, OpenStack, Linux security, can't beat it. Let me look over here. Let's go OpenShift. All right. So again, let's go contract. So DevOps security engineer, 100 to 150 an hour. Um, 93 to 104. That's in Jacksonville. Remote, Tampa, Arizona. Um, I don't know what IBM is talking about. Cloud storage architect. Mm. Site reliability engineer. We talked about that before. OpenShift consultant. So I mean, the list goes on. It is a possibility. Let's go senior level. Um, the locations. Let's see. Jacksonville, Baltimore, DC, Charlotte, Rockville, Maryland, Delaware, Arizona. Let's see what they're talking about in New York. Um, and the other thing where Linux pops up at is hedge funds, banks, JP Chase Morgan, Walmart, well, not Walmart, but Wells Fargo. Those are places that all use Linux. Yeah, it is. I like the one that she did on the OpenShift inside of the Linux Academy because it was quick and easy and simple to learn. Um, let's look at this one. Ah, didn't come up. Let's see, learningopenshift.com. Let's look at learning OpenShift. Just learn. There it is. All right. So foundations on OpenShift, so forth and so on. Service mesh. Well, we need to get someone from ITSEO on here. Um, that's another one. And CoreOS and Mesosphere. We should get someone people on. But going through OpenShift, let's see the foundations. Look and see. Getting started at command line. Yep, you can run through those, and you can also run through the ones from the Linux Academy as well too. Um, Again, like I say, I think it was a little condensed. The one from Linux Academy is for Red Hat. The one from OpenShift's website is from their open source product of OpenShift. So it's either or for that one. And now, in terms of where could you set this up at home? Yes, you can. You can set it up at, there's a difference. You can set it up on a bare metal machine. So there's a couple of places that I use just on bare metal. Packet.net is one, and my other go to one is Joe's Data Center. Because sometimes I don't want to spin up stuff on my laptop or whatever. I just don't. Because I would want all my machines to have 8 gigs of memory on my VMs to have this and that. So yeah, I'm kind of greedy with my stuff. And then sometimes things need that much that much memory. So with Joe's data center, you can you come here and get one. Like, see, they got one for $35, 8 gigs of memory. One with 24 for 39 a month. And I think they give you 5 IPs with it. Let me see. Let's do order now. Monthly 39. They'll put CentOS on it. One usable slash 30. Yeah, you could do a 5 with 29 IPs, so forth and so on. It'll be set up for a hypervisor, and then you can install whatever you want on there, VMware, or you can install EXI, or you can install Linux, and then start building your machines out. So it's all that's possible. Um, and when it comes to the final thing is, when it comes down to your questions that you're going to ask a recruiter, or questions that you're going to ask the interviewer, write them down before you go. Because it's it's nothing like getting in the interview and then you're like, oh, I don't have any questions. The other thing too is, when you're in an interview and a question pops in your head, just let the interviewer know before you start interviewing that you're going to be taking notes. And so you may write a question down, or they may ask you a question and you don't know the answer to, and you write it down and then you go look it up. You can always go back and say, well, you know what, I didn't know what that answer was, and send a thank you letter and then answer the question, and make sure you get the interviewer name in which you didn't know the answer to that question to, and then email them back, because now they know that you at least took the time to go look it up. You at least you invested, you've taken it serious. And sometimes it gets you brownie points and sometimes it don't, but at least you tried. You never know. You never know until you try. So those are just like my little tidbits when it comes to interviewing, from the perspective of just not even, I want to say, before the interview and during the interview. Those are things that I think about. And also, while I'm sitting there, I'm also thinking about how dynamic is the team. So does someone on the team know web development really, really well, and they have no idea about performance, or they don't have any idea about structure or what have you? So it's always a good idea to ask the team size and what specialty does everyone have on the team, and write it down. And then that gives you a great idea of how you can roll and fit into the team and the team dynamics. You know, are you gonna get along with everybody? Probably not. Um, but you're there to solve a problem, and you're there to influence and create change. And so sometimes you have to be the change you want to see, and sometimes you have to be the person that you want to work with, the person you want to see that in everyone else. And sometimes you just have to go in and kick down doors. Sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, but you have to be open for that. Any questions? How did you get used to be? How did you get used to being one of now? Because um, I've always been the only face in the place. I don't think it's something you just get used to. To be honest with you, I just never noticed it. I was just like, you're gonna cut me a check. Here's how much I want to get paid, and this is what I'm doing. The rest is just it. It just is. Joe's data center is just a place where you can go to get a server. And let me stop the recording too.